Some of the whites say we have a Muslim problem. You got guys like Tommy Robinson screaming from the rooftops. No, you have a poor immigrant problem because Jews have opened the borders. It's not because they're Muslim that they're causing these problems. Like, it's against Islam to rape. Guys like Ben Shapiro, I look at that guy, he's like a fucking moron. Nobody likes him. Everybody talks shit to him. I truly believe that if people zoom out, I think this supremacy problem is a very unifying issue.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The 50,000 prayer mats are here! Uh-oh. The first thing people need to do when they accept Islam is pray, but the process is very difficult because they don't know Arabic. This free salam mat they can order from the website, and you know what it has? It's got a transliteration. £100 can teach 10 to 30 people how to pray salah and do wudu. Imagine the sadaqah jariyah that you're gonna get when you've taught this person to pray and this person teaches that person to pray, and it goes on until the day of judgment.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. Dan Bilzerian just did a new podcast with Jake Shields and called out both Tommy Robinson and Ben Shapiro for their blatant Muslim bashing to further the cause of Jewish supremacy. Both Shapiro and Robinson are paid stooges for the Israeli government, with Ben having the added incentive of being Jewish himself. However, for Tommy, the incentive is purely monetary, as he willingly sells out his own people to do the bidding of his Zionist masters. Let's watch the first clip where Dan addresses Tommy.
You know, some of the whites say, oh, well, you know, now we have an Indian problem, or we have a Muslim problem, or we have this, or we have that. And you got guys like Tommy Robinson screaming from the rooftops, but he's not focused on who is destroying his country from within. When the truth of the matter is the Jews are causing the majority of these fucking problems. They just have too much leadership. They have too much influence. They have too much blackmail. But if the average person figures this out, then it becomes unenforceable. We've never been more divided. The whites think it's the blacks think the whites have been suppressing them and they're responsible for slavery, even though it was the fucking Jews who brought them over here. The Christians now are starting to think it's the Muslims because the Jews have imported a ton of like super poor military age Muslim men from war-torn countries. And so it's like, yeah, they happen to be Muslim, but it's not because they're Muslim that they're causing these problems. Like, it's against Islam to rape. Like, it is explicitly against, you know, rape. But when you have people that are, you know, 19 years old and they're coming from a country that just got the shit bombed out of them and they have no allegiance, no money, and they're basically operating with impunity, they're going to act like assholes. And that's not a Muslim problem. It's a poor immigrant problem. We have it from Mexico. Mexico is like 98% Christian. You guys have a bunch of Indians. I don't know if Indians are Hindu, or the blacks from Ethiopia are mostly Christian. They're causing a shitload of problems in Minnesota. And Somalians are causing the exact same problem. Somalians are mostly Muslim. Ethiopians are mostly Christian. But like I said, they've tried and paint it as like, oh, we have a Muslim problem. It's like, no, you have a poor immigrant problem because Jews have opened the borders. I had a similar thought process with the, you know, the Afghans, or, you know, as we called them in the military, towel heads, or, you know, sand or whatever names were used for these people to dehumanize them. Like, you know, they weren't the bad guys. We were fucking invading their country. You know, we're fucking, you know, kicking their door in. Like, what are you supposed to do as a man? You're supposed to grab a fucking gun and defend yourself. In Israel, they don't have open borders there. They keep it very ethnocentric, very nationalistic. You know, it's like, you know, this, that. It's like, yeah, what they preach and what they do are completely fucking opposite. And that should tell you a lot. My message is more of like, I think people need to wake the fuck up and come together against what the real problem is. This idea that like, fuck the liberals and fuck the blacks and fuck the Muslims, like, that doesn't win. I truly believe that if people zoom out, I think this supremacy problem is a very unifying issue.
As Dan said, certain white nationalists, along with Tommy Robinson and his followers, crying about a so-called Muslim immigration problem, are conveniently ignoring the crux of the issue, that being what is the actual cause of Muslim immigration to the West. Dan made the broad claim that Jewish people are behind this. I think, to be more specific, we should focus in on the Israelis, as it's their regime that is responsible for the majority of conflicts across the Middle East that result in Muslim refugee crises, as well as the Jewish elites that are behind orchestrating these wars, along with non-Jewish secular nations like America and Tommy's beloved Britain. Dan claimed that it's due to the average person's ignorance that these warmongers have been able to get away with this for so long. And that's the definition of anyone falling for Tommy Robinson's cheap and transparent propaganda, easily duped due to a lack of intelligence. As Dan stated, this is not a white versus black or Christian versus Muslim issue. It's simply an immigration issue caused by the continued exploitation of non-Western nations. Dan also debunked Tommy Robinson's bigoted framing of all Muslim men as potential rapists, when he correctly said that Islam strictly prohibits all forms of sexual violence, and anybody that conducts themselves outside of this framework is not practicing Islam. The facts are that skin colour, religion, or country of origin do not determine whether a human is more genetically prone to carry out an act of forced intimacy. Mentally disturbed people of all backgrounds do so because they're simply deviant in their thinking. Dan hammered home that there isn't a Muslim-specific immigration issue when he pointed out that America's largest immigrant group is Mexican Christians, while Britain's is Indian Hindus. And when he spoke of refugees from Africa coming to the West, he was correct to point out it's roughly an even split between Christians and Muslims. And if you look at the stats, there's actually more Christian Africans than Muslim Africans that migrate to the US and the UK. So once again, Dan was absolutely right when he said it's not accurate to frame this as a Muslim immigration problem. Dan put this down to a well-orchestrated Israeli plot to dehumanize Muslims, and related it back to how the same dishonest tactics were used against the Afghans when he was in the military in order to portray them as less human to justify invading their country and harming them. I agree with Dan's call for unity between people of different races, religions, and political ideologies to combat Zionist-powered Jewish supremacy, which is causing so many micro-issues globally. Let's watch the next clip where Dan addresses Ben Shapiro.
And there absolutely have, these Zios in there, these Israelis that are monitoring things and that have two sets of rules of like what you can say about Jews and other people. When you have blackmail people, and you have positions of power and then you don't let anybody else into positions of power that aren't, willing to play by the rules or that you don't have dirt on, then you create a system where it's like everybody's now beholden to this guy who's beholden to this guy, and this guy didn't get in office without, us having dirt on him. And you have a situation where you control so many people that, the house of cards, it's harder to fall. For me, it was Rafah. It was like when they marched all the refugees into Rafah and then they bombed the refugee camp. I distinctly remember that. And then plus the USS Liberty, I just learned about that. Like those two things together, plus, Jake was in my ear, that like set me off, right? Because I woke up my uncle. He was like a typical lifelong evangelical Christian that really thought that we had to support Israel. I started it. And I think Candace really opened his eyes because he watched Candace and he respected her opinion. And when you hear multiple people saying it and then you start to do the research and you find out like this isn't as bad as I thought, it's worse, and you keep finding that out. I mean, people don't like getting lied to, man. They're just not going to hand over the keys, right? Like they're not going to go down without a fight. Still. So the question is like, how crazy are they going to get? And I think they're going to get pretty crazy. However, the crazier they get, I think the faster it accelerates people waking up. Because guys like Ben Shapiro, who, I mean, shit, man, 5 years ago, I used to listen to the guy and be like, this guy's smart, like if he says something and it carries a lot of weight, he's obviously an intelligent guy. I look at that guy, he's like, look like a fucking moron today. And nobody likes him. Everybody talks shit to him. The shift that has happened and the time that it's happened has given me some hope. Every revolution that we've ever seen up until 25 years ago had zero internet behind it. And so the speed at which people could spread this word and access information, I think a lot of it comes down to like intent. And I think if somebody's willing to like risk their career, like Greta Thunberg, like say what you want about her, like she's going to the fucking mats. You know what I'm saying? Like she's doing a lot more than, some Republican guys that I see eye to eye with on a lot of issues. They're not making the sacrifices that she's making. So I have a certain level of respect for that, because there's a lot of people that know what the fuck's going on right now and are too scared to say it. I feel like with they always start the story and after they've done the most horrific shit, what the response is to that horrific shit, October 7th, the Warsaw ghettos, whatever, like they talk about the response to Bolshevism. They talk about the response to, 70 something years of persecution of these Palestinians. They always talk about the response when they get kicked out of all these countries, but like, why did they get kicked out? They always skip to the part in history where they're being punished for their absurdly ridiculous actions. And it skews the whole picture.
Dan called out how the Israeli government is able to use tech to monitor regular people across the world. I don't think any country should have the right to do so. Personally, I feel there should be some legal consequences for such an invasion of privacy. Dan made the claim that this method of spying is carried out with the purpose of blackmailing politicians to fall in line, which is just sinister beyond belief. Any nation that has to resort to this type of malicious behaviour is very dangerous and cannot be trusted whatsoever. Like Dan, so many people have been awakened by what happened in Gaza over the last couple of years, to the extent of how compromised our governments really are. Where not only the harsh reality of a live genocide unfolding right before our eyes was revealed, but we were able to see the disturbing historic pattern of Israel's corruption throughout the decades, as well as the countless atrocities they've committed and the downright evil propaganda tactics they use to cover up and shift the blame, after they themselves initiate the violence and are responsible for prolonged oppression. I appreciate Dan Bilzerian's efforts in educating his friends, family and the world on these facts, as this comes with a lot of drama which he doesn't benefit from at all. So for him to feel a moral responsibility to do so deserves respect. Dan also called out Ben Shapiro, who is one of the top propagandist for the Israeli government for being able to pull the wool over people's eyes for so long, posing as an American conservative, who is now widely hated and viewed as nothing more than a shill and a complete moron, as Dan put it. As he said, the Palestine situation, as bleak and sad as it is, has led to a revolution due to the internet era we live in, and has not only exposed the wrongdoers, but has also shown us whose moral compass is intact. Like Dan said, this transcends left or right political leanings, and instead allows us to see who we can trust in terms of courage, righteousness, and good intentions. There is supposedly a ceasefire in place, and although I'm grateful for a reduction to the violence, the reality is people are still being killed in Gaza and the West Bank as we speak. It's just that social media platforms have had their algorithms switched to suppress and censor what's still going on. Hence why I respect Dan and anyone else for that matter who still go out their way to speak the truth about what Palestinians and Muslims across the world are going through. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, and remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah